Exactly.
Now, if you look at the members that were there, you mentioned them. Bob Carr became a congressman.
Right.
And he was a flamboyant, good-looking type of guy.
Right.
And Mary Kay Scullion, of course, worked for the House for a long time.
Long time.
Bruce Timmons, I think, still be
he's still there.
Employed.
He's
Gord
still there.
Vandertil went to work for Jerry Ford
Right.
in Grand Rapids and in our nation's capital.
Right.
So these people, and Jimmy Hoffa is now, I think,
the head of the Teamsters.
Head of the Teamsters.
Yeah, absolutely. No,
so they did well.
They did very well. And if you were the chairman of that committee, that really says something. That's really great. Abortion was a huge issue, climaxing with the Roe v. Wade decision in early 1973. But before that, it had been an item of controversy. In the 60s, you had a fellow state senator, Lorraine Beebe, make a dramatic speech on the Senate floor that she had had an abortion.
When I first came to the Senate, and for the first 4 years, we never heard of abortion.
Yeah.
It wasn't an issue. And then a governor in Colorado by the name of Dick Lamb had legislation introduced in Colorado to legalize abortion. And all of a sudden it became a major issue. And in the Senate, Senator Gil Bursley introduced the first abortion bill. And the chief opponent was Bill Ryan in the House. And for all these years, Gil Bursley argued in favor of it, and Bill Ryan argued against it, and they never came together and never resolved the issue. So that's when it started, the abortion controversy. And of course, we had bills that would have authorized it. We had amendments to appropriation bills which would prohibit welfare money from being used for abortion, and all these ancillary issues came up until finally in 73, I think it might have been in January of 73, this U.S. Supreme Court took it away from the states, nationalized the issue, and the major issue then died.
Right. What about the PBB issue?
Milliken was governor at that time, and I think that was one of the major headaches that Bill Milliken had, was the PBB issue.
PBB was polybrominated biphenyls, wasn't that it?
It was a product which was used to basically in the electrical world.
It was a fire retardant.
It was a
and
fire
it got
retardant.
accidentally mixed into cattle feed.
It was a retardant that was used by the electrical world in transformers and other devices when you would take a high voltage and you'd want to lower it to a lower voltage. It would create a great deal of heat. So this product was developed to stop that, and then it was used for fire retardant, and farmers would buy it to paint their barnyard fences and the interior of the barn and stuff like that. It would be mixed in with the whitewash or the paint. And in some grain mill in southern Michigan, it got mixed in with the feed. And it was pretty widespread in Michigan.
The VanderLaan farm wasn't still going at that
No.
time, was it?
It was in Cadillac, Michigan.
Yeah.
And had some big farms. And we toured some of these farms, and the cattle were grotesque. It was just, hard to look at these cows, and they were slaughtered. And the question was, what do you do with them? And finally, I think some sparsely populated county around Atlanta, Michigan was chosen as the place where they would bury these cattle, much to the chagrin of the people that lived there, but at least they had to go somewhere.
Well, the criticism of the governor was that it was his agriculture department that oversaw farming in Michigan. How could he have let this happen? Was that basically it?
I think so. And the remedial action was way too slow. It should have been caught much quicker. They didn't know for a long time what was causing it. They didn't have any idea. But we would meet on it weekly, the leadership of the Senate and the House, and talk about how to resolve this problem. And one member of the Senate, very seriously one morning, had a very creative idea. He wanted the governor to contact NASA and put it all into orbit. And
really?
Get it off the planet.
Get it off. And that is pretty unique. That is pretty unique. Well, okay, so what it became an issue actually in Milliken's reelection
That's right.
campaign in '78. I mean, we're getting kind of way late here.
Yep.
Bill Fitzgerald was
Yep.
a Democratic state senator. He was a
Yep.
Democratic nominee, and he tried to make a big issue out of it. Did the PBB controversy really catch on as an issue in that Milliken reelection campaign of 1978?
No, it really didn't. I think the Milliken's first two opponents were probably Sandra Levin, and then it was Bill Fitzgerald. And Fitzgerald, I don't think he really ever caught on as a serious contender for the job. He had a good name. The Fitzgerald name was a good name, but.
Let me ask you this. We've just kind of scanned over this. After the election in 1970, when Milliken was elected to his first full term, we went through the parochiate issue and everything else. The Republicans lost one seat in the Senate. That was Lorraine Beebe's. They had a 1919 tie. And Lieutenant Governor, who was Jim Brickley, a Republican, could cast a tie-breaking vote. So who's going to control the Senate here? It's 1919. Brickley is the tie-breaking guy. You're selected by your fellow Republicans as the leader of the caucus, but are you going to be the majority leader? Are you going to be minority? You're going to be a co-leader with a Democratic counterpart? What's the deal? What happened?
Well, we had a lot of caucuses on how we were going to resolve that problem. And we decided that we would change the rules before the end of the current session. And the rule would be that you would elect the majority leader by a majority of vote rather than by a majority of those seats. In other words, if we would have 15 votes and the Democrats would have 14, then I would be the majority leader.
Right.
In other words, we didn't need
the lieutenant governor's tie-breaking vote. So you're saying between the November election in 1970 and the end of the year, when the new Senate would come in and only be 1919, you changed the rules to say we can include the lieutenant governor's vote if we have to.
If we had a tie in 1919,
yeah.
the lieutenant governor would break the tie.
Right.
Well, what would be the Democratic plan then? Well, one of them would pull off.
Right.
So the lieutenant governor wouldn't have the possibility of a tie vote.
Right.
And then under the old rule, you couldn't elect the leader.
Anybody.
But we changed the rule that said you could elect the leader with less than a complete or majority
I see.
at that time.
I see, okay.
And that worked, but we had a problem.
That's right.
Charlie Zoller had a heart attack.
Right.
And he wasn't able to come to the Senate, at least it looked that way. So I went to visit him a number of times in his hospital room, and the last time he said, "You know, Van," he said, I'm counting all the little tiles in the ceiling of my room, and I think that means I'm well enough, and I'll be there when you have your organizational meeting."
Didn't they kind of wheel him in? I mean, it was elaborate.
He
It
was
was
in
like
his
moving
office.
the hospital room.
He was in his office, and everyone was in the Senate, and it was going to be highly, emotional.
Yeah.
And everyone was there, and Jim Brickley was clued in, and he knew what was going on. And Charlie Zoller came in the back door. We had an elevator in the back of the Senate there, in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
And Charlie had a flair for the for this type of thing.
Dramatic, yeah.
And came in and reeled into his seat, and we had the vote, and
that was it.
that was it.
Those magical 4 years between 1970 and 74 when you were majority leader, what do you remember about that time?
Well, Bill Faust was the leader of the Democratic Party.
Right.
And Bill Faust was a reasonable person, good to work with, and we were pretty close friends. He was a very close friend of Al DeGrow, and Al DeGrow had a lot of contact with him at the time. We had an awful lot of meetings between Bill Faust, myself, and I think it was Bobby Krim in
The Speaker
House.
of the House,
And-
Democratic Speaker.
in
of
the
House.
governor's office. And that led to a sort of a friendship between Bobby Krim and we worked together,
yeah.
and we learned to trust each other, and that led, of course, eventually to our partnership.